David Seymour now joins me. Hello, David. Good to see you.
Yeah, hey, good to see you too, Chris.
Christchurch Leanne Dalzell wrote an opinion piece suggesting your comments on the history of colonisation, suggesting it casts children as victims or villains by birth. She calls that disgraceful. What is your response to that?
Well, you have to forgive me. I haven't been religiously keeping up with Leanne Dalzell's musings, but I know she's someone who's often been very sensible and sounds from what you're saying like she may have had an off day. All I've said is that when you tell people as young children that the Maori history is the foundational and continuous history of Aotearoa, and then when you say that colonisation was entirely bad, what young children take from that is that actually you're either a victim, and that's not a good thing to tell a young person. You know, being a victim is not actually a positive thing because it can give you reasons to not try or think that things are someone else's fault, or a villain in the sense that your ancestors were the bad people in history. And actually, it doesn't help to characterise people that way either. We should each be asking what can we do in our own time on earth rather than have the sins of the fathers visited upon the sons, etc. So, you know, that's what I've said. The former Aotearoa Histories curriculum did say that Maori history is the continuous and foundational history of Aotearoa New Zealand. And what we're saying with the new curriculum is actually our country has many strands. People have come from all over the world. And yes, Maori history, of course, is important. Of course, we should celebrate it. But it's not the only game in town. And everybody should be able to be proud of their heritage, warts and all. There's good and bad in all of it. But most importantly, start from a foundation that we all have equal dignity and equal rights to make the most of our time on earth. So I don't know if that's what she's objecting to, but if she is, she may have had an off day.
New Zealand First's private members bill to remove the Māori seats from Parliament. You for that or against it?
Yeah, it's actually in the ACT Party constitution that we would like to get rid of the Maori seats because we just don't think that there's a good reason to have them. If you go back to 1860, you actually had to own land, and be a man for that matter, if you wanted to vote. And because Māori land ownership was collectivised, Maori individuals often didn't have a land title, so special seats were created so that Maori could vote. And in many ways, it was quite an enlightened thing to do to keep everybody included in spite of the standards of the time, which were largely about excluding people from voting. Now, people will argue that proportionately there weren't enough Maori seats. That may be true. But all of that happened in the 1860s. Since then, of course, New Zealand led the world with votes for women and saying every adult New Zealander has the same rights, which I think is one of the best things about New Zealand, one of our proudest achievements. And you also don't need to own land to vote. So none of the reasons for having these Maori seats still exist. There's been various recommendations over the years they should be gotten rid of. And the ACT Party has always said, look, if you can remove distinctions in law that divide people by their ethnicity, you should. That's why it's in our constitution to get rid of the seats. And look, if there's a vote come up, we'll certainly do it.
David, in your State of the Nation speech in Christchurch, you said you want equal rights for all citizens so we can feel part of a, quote, positive and inclusive identity. Then what makes you think New Zealand doesn't already have that?
Well, I'll tell you a story. I was talking to a couple of parents recently. A 5-year-old just started school, very exciting, for them at least, possibly for him too. He came home and said, "Mum, are we Maori?" And the mother, who is not Maori, and neither is the father, said, "Well, no." And the kid said, "Well, could we become Maori?" And the mum said, "Look, no, that's not how it works. We just are who we are." And the kid got very upset and he said, "So I don't have a home." And when you think about that, now look, it's a 5-year-old, maybe you got confused, but something is seriously wrong when the prevailing culture is that we uphold a version of the treaty and its principles that say that there are tangata whenua and tangata tiriti, land people and people who are here by dint of the treaty. That's the prevailing view in government departments and from the Waitangi Tribunal and the educational curriculum. Many organisations have been pushing this view that we have a different role in society based on when our ancestors settled here. Now, we're all settlers, whether it was 800 years ago in the case of some of my Maori ancestors, or just this morning, people getting off the plane at Auckland International to begin their journey as Kiwis for the rest of their lives. We're all settlers. And to have this idea that people should be somehow ranked and divided as more or less special based on when they or their ancestors settled is really un-Kiwi. And I oppose it. I think if we want to get into problem solving, then we actually need to focus our attention on the problems. How do we balance the books? How do we raise productivity and pay our way? How do we make sure that government is responsive? How do we make sure the next generation feel they get a fair suck of the salve? Those are all challenges that exist regardless of when your ancestors got here. So I think we should focus on that instead of trying to create superficial differences, as we've invested a huge amount of time doing in recent years.
In the same speech, though, you said, and I quote, "I listened to Te Pāti Maori and they frighten me." What specifically frightens you?
What frightens me is two things. One is their underlying belief system. And they explicitly say that New Zealand should be tiriti-centric, and that means that there should be tangata whenua, land people, and tangata tiriti, treaty people. So there's two types of people based on birth. So I just oppose that basic idea that people should have the mark of Cain before they were even born and be either victims or villains in a narrative written before they were born. I mean, that's crazy. I oppose that as a principle. But the other thing about them is that if you look at their haka on the floor of Parliament, if you look at their behaviour, they believe that they are not bound by basic decency and respect that other people show each other. And you saw
right.
it up at Waitangi. One of their supporters, actually, I think the wife of one of their MPs, got up, went across to the other side of the marae and got right up in the face of one of the hosts. And the people on that side said, well, that's the last straw. So whether it's in Parliament or whether it's on a marae, they seem to believe that they are not bound to respect the basic duties and respect that is required in this country or any civilised country. So it's the underlying beliefs and the way that they believe they're entitled to go about advancing their ideas. That is frightening.
There are some local candidates who are going to be trying to put their hand up for the Māori Party. They've obviously seen the writing on the wall, David. They've left and now trying their hand at the Green Party movement. Does that suggest to you that is the Māori Party finished in your view?
Look, that's up to them and the voters and the electorates they've won previously. The only observation I'd make is that it's not clear what they stand for. I mean, if they came to Parliament like Pita Sharples and Tariana Turia and Te Ururoa Flavel and say, look, we all know that on average Maori have had a bad deal and they're behind in a lot of statistics and things need to work differently. So let's do education differently. Let's make things work for Maori. That's something we can get on board with. But, at the moment, the ACT Party, with charter schools that are run by Maori for Maori to break down the distrust that some Maori have in government institutions, and in some parts of the country you can understand that going back a few generations. We're actually trying to practically solve the problem and make it easier to transfer knowledge from one generation to the next, so young people can have a shot at striving and surviving and thriving in the 21st century. I mean, the ACT Party's doing more practical stuff for Maori than the Maori Party. If they actually had a practical proposition, there'd be a reason to vote for them. But I don't see what that is other than theatre and anger.
Theatre's right, that's for sure. I want to just briefly move on to the economy and jobs. I don't know if you saw this story the other day. I thought it was quite compelling. It was for an entry-level job in Auckland, recently attracted 2,500 applicants. Is that a sign the economy is working or isn't?
Well, I mean, there's one job that's been created, but there's clearly not enough. And that's why we need to make sure that the government spends its money carefully, because when government has a blowout, we get inflation, we get high interest rates, we get a lack of business confidence, we get a lack of spending from households because they're paying those high interest rates, so they can't buy as much because inflation's driven prices up. So, we've seen that whole cycle. We had that from about 2021 to about 2024. Since then, this government has got on top of its own spending and created a bit more hope and positivity. We've also cut a lot of red tape in order that people can get on with actually producing rather than being held back by having to get consent or wait for a permit or whatever, or just not being allowed to do stuff at all. All of that stuff just makes it harder to do the basic task of job creation. Someone has an idea, they get investment, they take on employees, and then they sell to customers. And it's not actually complicated, it's just a lot of hard work and it requires good ideas. That's the kind of thing we need to see more of. And the best thing the government can do, other than making sure the streets are safe and the rules are clear, is get out of the way. That's what this government's doing. And there are signs of optimism and economic activity returning through what people are saying, and also through some of the statistics that are coming out now about business confidence and business activity. So look, it is working, but I can understand we've had like 5 years of this now, and so people are pretty raw. I can understand that, but that doesn't mean that what we're doing isn't working. It just hasn't worked yet.
Only 44% of those applicants were from New Zealand. Are we then doing enough to create jobs for local workers, or are immigration settings increasing competition at the lower end of the market?
Well, I think if you look at the position that most employers find themselves in, if you have a choice between someone off the shelf who's right here, speaks English, understands the manners and customs of New Zealand, and has a permit to work straight away because they're a New Zealander, so they don't need a permit, I struggle to believe that many employers would say, oh no, forget that, I want to go through the rigmarole of getting someone offshore. Why are they still doing it? I suspect because actually, people say Kiwis aren't hard working. Most Kiwis are working hard. It's those people at the margin that they're trying to get on, where you've got some people who have just lost their job recently and getting back into the workforce, and good on them. But there's a long-term hardcore of people who have been on benefits in some cases for generations that won't get back into the habit of working, and that's where you get a choice. We could stop immigration and try and force employers to employ those people. I don't know that it'd work so well. I think what we really need, frankly, in the next year is more welfare reform, because for long-term dependents, we haven't actually done enough to get people back into work, and therefore immigration's become the substitute.
Just finally, David, final question. Obviously, you were in Christchurch last week for the State of the Nation address. When you were speaking to ACT supporters and people who turned up, what was the one thing they said to you that was concerning them the most?
Look, in Christchurch, it's the economy is better than the rest of the country.
Yeah, that's true. We're actually doing all right. We're doing okay.
Yeah, you are doing good, and you're doing good in part because after the earthquake, a lot of the rules around building were relaxed, and you actually got stuff built, and there's now homes, and young families are moving to Christchurch, which is fantastic for Christchurch. But the rest of the country needs to take note. Look, to answer your question, it wasn't about the economy and the cost of living as much as it might be in other parts of the country. I'm sure there are people with that challenge in Christchurch, but not as much. It was basically, you've got to win. If you don't win, if the other guys get in, we're getting out of the country. So, I think the biggest threat to New Zealand and its economic recovery this year is a change of government, because, the guys that created the mess are trying to argue that they're somehow not responsible, and getting them back in is the solution to the problems they caused. So, that's the big task that Chris Luxon and I have this year, is we've got to persuade people that actually we need to keep going in the same direction.
Deputy Prime Minister David Seymour, thanks so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.